You know those Hollywood legends that seem larger than life? The ones who could do it all, sports, acting, commanding a screen with just their presence? Chuck Connors was that guy. 6'5" of pure charisma, a professional athlete who became one of television's most beloved father figures. But behind that iconic rifle and those piercing eyes on the Rifleman, there was a man harboring something dark. Something that would shock even his most devoted fans. Because Chuck Connors, America's favorite TV dad, truly hated someone in Hollywood more than anyone else. And the reason? It's absolutely shocking. What you're about to discover will change everything you thought you knew about the man behind Lucas McCain. Before we dive into the explosive revelation that rocked Hollywood, we need to understand who Chuck Connors really was. Because this wasn't just some actor playing dress-up in cowboy boots. This was a genuine American original whose life read like an adventure novel long before he ever stepped foot on a soundstage. Born Kevin Joseph Aloysius Connors on April 10, 1921 in Brooklyn, New York, he grew up in a working-class Irish-American family during the Great Depression. His parents, Marcella and Alban Connors, raised him with strong values, a fierce work ethic, and the kind of determination that would carry him through not one, but three completely different careers. And here's something most people don't know. Chuck absolutely despised his birth name Kevin. He thought it sounded too feminine, too soft for the kind of man he wanted to become. So he changed it. That tells you everything you need to know about his personality right there. He wasn't going to let anything, not even his own name, stand in the way of his vision for himself. Young Chuck discovered early on that he had natural athletic ability. We're not talking about being decent at sports. This kid was extraordinary. At 6'5" with a powerful build, he dominated every playing field he stepped onto. Basketball, baseball, didn't matter. He excelled at both. After attending Adelphi Academy and then Seton Hall University, Connors made a decision that would make him part of an incredibly exclusive club. He was going to play professional sports. Not just one sport, mind you. He was going to conquer both basketball and baseball at the highest levels. Think about that for a moment. In an era when athletes specialized early and dedicated themselves to a single sport, Chuck Connors was about to do something only 12 other athletes in history have ever accomplished: play in both the NBA and Major League Baseball. In 1946, Connors joined the Boston Celtics. Yes, that Boston Celtics. And here's where it gets interesting. During a pregame warm-up at the Boston Garden, Chuck Connors became the first player in NBA history to shatter a backboard. Just completely destroyed it with a dunk. Can you imagine the scene? The sound of exploding glass, players diving for cover, and there's Chuck Connors standing there, probably with that signature smirk of his, having just made basketball history in the most destructive way possible. That incident became legendary, a perfect metaphor for how he approached everything in life, with overwhelming force and absolutely no apologies. But basketball was just the beginning. Connors also played minor league baseball and made it to the majors, playing for the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1949 and the Chicago Cubs in 1951. Now, his major league career was brief, just 66 games. But the fact that he made it to both the NBA and MLB puts him in rarefied air. We're talking about an athlete of truly exceptional caliber. However, as his sports career began to wind down, something else was calling to him. The bright lights of Hollywood. The chance to become something more than just a name in a box score. Chuck Connors was about to reinvent himself once again, and this time, it would make him a household name across America. The transition from athlete to actor wasn't as unusual as you might think for that era. Several former sports stars successfully made the jump to Hollywood, but few did it as successfully as Chuck Connors. His rugged good looks, commanding physical presence, and natural charisma made him perfect for the big screen. He started with small roles, gradually working his way up. But everything changed in 1958 when he was cast as Lucas McCain in a new television western called The Rifleman. This wasn't just another cowboy show. This was something different, something special. The series focused on a widowed rancher raising his son alone on the frontier, using his modified Winchester rifle to protect his family and uphold justice in the lawless New Mexico territory. The Rifleman became an instant sensation. Running for 5 seasons and 168 episodes from 1958 to 1963, the show made Chuck Connors one of the biggest stars on television. But what really set the series apart was the relationship between Lucas McCain and his son Mark, played by the incredibly talented young actor Johnny Crawford. The father-son dynamic was the emotional heart of the show, and the chemistry between Connors and Crawford was so genuine, so touching, that audiences across America fell in love with them. Here's what made it even more special. That relationship wasn't just acting. Behind the scenes, Chuck Connors genuinely took Johnny Crawford under his wing, mentoring the young actor and treating him like the son he portrayed on screen. Johnny Crawford, who was just 12 years old when the show began, has spoken numerous times over the years about how Chuck became a real father figure to him. Connors taught him about acting, about life, about being a man in Hollywood. They spent countless hours together, not just filming, but bonding over their shared love of baseball. Chuck would take Johnny to games, they'd practice together, and that authentic relationship translated into the magic we saw on screen every week. Years later, Crawford would tearfully recall how Chuck Connors was one of the most important influences in his life, someone who genuinely cared about his well-being and success. When Chuck died in 1992, Johnny was devastated, having lost not just a co-star, but a true mentor and friend. The success of the Rifleman made Chuck Connors wealthy and famous, but it also typecast him in the public's mind. He was Lucas McCain, the honorable widowed father with the lightning-fast rifle. But Chuck wasn't content to rest on his laurels. After The Rifleman ended, he took on numerous other roles in both television and film. He starred in Branded from 1965 to 1966, playing a disgraced cavalry officer fighting to clear his name. He appeared in dozens of movies, playing everything from tough guys to villains to authority figures. He worked constantly throughout the 60s, 70s, and 80s, never really slowing down. But despite all these roles, he would forever be remembered as the Rifleman. And Chuck made peace with that. He embraced it, understood that Lucas McCain had given him a legacy that few actors ever achieve. But here's where things get interesting. Because behind the scenes, Chuck Connors was far more complex than the simple, virtuous character he portrayed on television. He was a man of contradictions. He could be incredibly warm and generous, mentoring young actors and befriending everyone from stagehands to studio executives. But he could also be stubborn, prideful, and when crossed, absolutely ruthless. He had strong opinions about everything: politics, acting, sports, life, and he wasn't shy about sharing them. Chuck was a staunch conservative Republican who actively supported Richard Nixon and other Republican candidates. He attended fundraisers, gave speeches, and used his celebrity platform to promote his political beliefs. This wasn't unusual for Hollywood stars of his generation, but it did create tensions with some of his more liberal colleagues in the entertainment industry. And then there were his personal relationships. Chuck Connors was married 3 times, and each marriage tells us something about the man behind the public persona. His first marriage was to Elizabeth Jane Riddell Connors, whom he met at one of his baseball games in Montreal. They married in October 1948 and had 4 sons together: Michael, Jeffrey, Stephen, and Kevin. For years, they appeared to be the picture-perfect American family. But the pressures of Chuck's career, the constant travel, the demands of fame, and his own personal demons slowly eroded the foundation of their marriage. They divorced in 1961 after 13 years together. His second marriage was to Kamala Devi, a stunning Indian-American actress he met on the set of the 1962 film Geronimo. There was instant chemistry between them, both on and off screen. They married on April 10, 1963, Chuck's 42nd birthday, in what seemed like a Hollywood fairy tale. Kamala appeared in several episodes of Chuck's shows, including The Rifleman, Branded, and Cowboy in Africa. But this marriage, too, was troubled. The entertainment industry can be brutal on relationships, and the pressures of 2 actors trying to build careers while maintaining a marriage proved too much. They divorced in 1972 after 9 years together. Chuck's third and final marriage was to Faith Quabius in September 1977. This relationship was perhaps the most mysterious of all his marriages. Faith was not in the entertainment industry, and she preferred to stay out of the spotlight. Their marriage lasted less than 3 years, ending in divorce in April 1980. After that, Chuck never married again. He spent the last 12 years of his life single, living on his ranch in Tehachapi, California, north of Los Angeles. Some who knew him said he seemed content in his solitude. Others wondered if he carried regrets about the relationships that had failed, the bridges he had burned, the choices he had made. Because here's the thing about Chuck Connors that few people understood. Beneath that charming exterior, beneath that warm smile that made him America's favorite TV dad, There was a man capable of holding grudges like you wouldn't believe. And nowhere was this more evident than in his professional relationships. Chuck had worked with dozens of major stars throughout his career. Some became lifelong friends, like John Wayne. The Duke and Chuck shared a mutual respect and admiration that lasted until Wayne's death in 1979. When Wayne needed a reliable actor for a supporting role, he would call Chuck, and Chuck would always say yes. "If Duke asks, I ride," he once said, perfectly capturing the loyalty these two men shared. He was also close with other Hollywood legends like Sammy Davis Jr. Despite the racial tensions of the era, Chuck and Sammy developed a genuine friendship built on mutual respect. Connors admired Sammy's incredible talent and his courage in breaking down racial barriers in entertainment. Sammy, in turn, respected Chuck's professionalism and the decency he showed to everyone on set, regardless of their background or position in the Hollywood hierarchy. Their friendship was a testament to Chuck's ability to see beyond the superficial divisions that plagued American society during the Civil Rights era. But not everyone got along with Chuck Connors. Not everyone appreciated his strong personality, his unwavering opinions, his refusal to compromise on matters of principle. And there was one man, one major Hollywood star, who Chuck Connors came to despise with an intensity that shocked everyone who witnessed it. This wasn't just professional rivalry. This wasn't a simple personality clash. This was deep personal animosity that festered for decades. And that man was Gregory Peck. Now, before you dismiss this as just another Hollywood feud, understand that Gregory Peck was one of the biggest stars in the world. He was Atticus Finch in To Kill a Mockingbird, one of cinema's most beloved characters. He was handsome, talented, respected, admired. He represented everything noble and good about Hollywood's golden age. So for Chuck Connors to openly despise Gregory Peck? That was shocking. That was scandalous. That demanded an explanation. And the story behind their hatred is even more fascinating than you can imagine. It all began in 1957 during the filming of The Big Country, an epic western directed by the legendary William Wyler and produced by Gregory Peck himself through his production company. This was an enormous production, filmed in stunning locations with an all-star cast that included Peck, Charlton Heston, Gene Simmons, Carol Baker, Burl Ives, and Chuck Connors. On paper, it should have been a dream project. An A-list cast, a renowned director, a big budget, sweeping cinematography, and a compelling story about feuding ranch families in the Old West. What could go wrong? Everything. Absolutely everything. The problems began almost immediately. William Wyler was a perfectionist director known for demanding take after take until he got exactly what he wanted. Gregory Peck, as both star and producer, had very specific ideas about how his character should be portrayed and how the film should be made. These two strong-willed men clashed constantly, creating a tense, uncomfortable atmosphere on set. But it wasn't just Wyler and Peck. Charlton Heston, playing a supporting role, felt his character was being marginalized in favor of Peck's hero. He fought for more screen time, better scenes, more depth. Meanwhile, the script was being constantly rewritten, sometimes just hours before scenes were to be filmed. Actors would learn their lines, only to be handed completely new dialogue the next morning. Gene Simmons later recalled that the experience was so traumatic, she refused to talk about the film for years. Into this powder keg walked Chuck Connors, cast as Buck Hannessy, one of the rough, violent sons of a feuding ranch family. This was one of Chuck's early major film roles, and he was determined to make an impression. He threw himself into the character, bringing intensity and physicality to the role. But Chuck quickly realized that something was very wrong on this production. The constant tension, the fighting between Peck and Wyler, the script rewrites, the general chaos, it was unlike anything he had experienced. And what really bothered Chuck was what he perceived as Gregory Peck's arrogance. According to people who were there, Chuck felt that Peck was using his dual role as star and producer to manipulate the production in his favor. Peck would reportedly override directorial decisions he didn't like, demand rewrites that favored his character, and generally behave as though the entire film existed solely to showcase his talents. Now, to be fair to Peck, he was the producer. He had every right to make these decisions. He had invested his own money in the film, and he wanted it to succeed. But Chuck didn't see it that way. Chuck saw an egomaniacal star throwing his weight around, making everyone else's life miserable, and acting like he was better than the other actors on set. Things came to a head during the filming of a crucial scene. A brutal fistfight between Gregory Peck's character Jim McKay and Chuck Connor's character Buck Hannessy. In the story, this fight is supposed to be a gentleman's duel to settle their differences, but Buck jumps the gun and attacks Jim before they're ready. The fight was choreographed to be long and intense, showing both characters as tough, determined men unwilling to back down. But during the actual filming, things got out of hand. Multiple takes were required, as Wyler insisted on getting every angle, every movement perfect. Hours passed under the hot sun as these two men threw each other around, traded punches, and grappled in the dirt. And according to witnesses, some of those punches connected a little too hard. Some of those throws were a little too rough. Whether it was intentional or just the result of exhaustion and frustration, the physical nature of the scene became personal. Chuck, with his background as a professional athlete, was significantly stronger and more physically imposing than Peck. But Peck was no weakling, and he wasn't about to let Connors push him around. The tension was palpable, and everyone on set could feel it. When filming finally wrapped on that scene, Chuck and Gregory barely spoke to each other. The professional courtesy that's expected on film sets was gone, replaced by cold, hostile silence. And it never got better. For the remainder of the production, these two men avoided each other as much as possible. They did their scenes together when required, but there was no warmth, no camaraderie, nothing but barely concealed animosity. When The Big Country was finally released in October 1958, it received mixed reviews but was a box office success. The film is now considered a classic of the Western genre, praised for its cinematography, performances, and ambitious scope. Brezhnev won an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor for his role as the patriarch of the Hannessy clan. But for Chuck Connors, the film represented something else entirely. It represented the moment he learned to truly hate Gregory Peck. In the years that followed, Chuck never publicly discussed his feelings about Peck during interviews. He was too professional for that, too aware that publicly badmouthing a major star would hurt his own career. But privately, to friends and trusted colleagues, he made his feelings crystal clear. He thought Gregory Peck was a phony. He thought Peck was arrogant, self-absorbed, and not nearly as noble as the characters he portrayed on screen. Chuck felt that Peck had made the filming of The Big Country unnecessarily difficult for everyone involved because of his ego and his need to control everything. And Chuck Connors never forgave him for it. What made this hatred even more interesting was how different these two men were in almost every way. Gregory Peck was a liberal Democrat who supported progressive causes and candidates. Chuck Connors was a conservative Republican. Peck was refined, educated, sophisticated, the epitome of old Hollywood elegance. Chuck was rough around the edges, a former athlete who had worked his way up from the streets of Brooklyn. Peck carefully cultivated his public image as America's moral compass. Chuck didn't care what people thought. He was going to be himself, flaws and all. These fundamental differences in personality, politics, and approach to life only deepened the gulf between them. But here's what's really fascinating. Despite his intense personal dislike of Gregory Peck, Chuck Connors never denied Peck's talent as an actor. In rare moments when the subject came up, Chuck would grudgingly admit that Peck was good at what he did. But he would always add something like, "Being a good actor doesn't make you a good person." That distinction was important to Chuck. He separated the art from the artist, and he found the artist severely lacking. Their paths crossed occasionally at Hollywood events and industry functions over the years, and witnesses say the encounters were always frosty. They would nod politely, exchange the bare minimum of pleasantries required by social convention, and then move on as quickly as possible. There was never any reconciliation, never any moment where they buried the hatchet and moved past their mutual animosity. The hatred that began on the set of The Big Country in 1957 lasted for the rest of Chuck Connors' life. But Gregory Peck wasn't the only Hollywood figure Chuck clashed with. His strong personality and unwillingness to compromise led to other conflicts as well. There were reports of tension with Dan Blocker of Bonanza fame, though the details are murky and much less documented than the Peck situation. Some sources suggest they had a falling out in 1968 over a stage performance or personal matter, but both men kept the details private. Unlike his hatred of Peck, any issues Chuck had with Blocker seemed to have been resolved, as they later appeared together in various functions without apparent animosity. Chuck also had complicated relationships with various directors and producers throughout his career. He wasn't a difficult actor in the traditional sense. He showed up on time, knew his lines, and did his job professionally. But he had opinions about how scenes should be played, how characters should be developed, and he wasn't shy about voicing those opinions. Some directors appreciated his input and collaborative spirit. Others found him overbearing and wished he would just do what he was told. Chuck walked a fine line throughout his career between being respected as a serious professional and being labeled as difficult. What's remarkable is how Chuck compartmentalized these professional conflicts. He could disagree vehemently with a director about a scene, even have a heated argument, and then go have drinks with the crew afterward like nothing happened. He didn't hold grudges against most people. He understood that filmmaking was a collaborative process that involved strong personalities clashing and working through differences. But with Gregory Peck, it was different. That wasn't just a professional disagreement. That was personal, and it went deep. As Chuck's career continued through the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, he remained consistently busy. After The Rifleman ended in 1963, he starred in Branded, another Western series where he played a cavalry officer court-martialed for cowardice and fighting to clear his name. The show lasted 2 seasons from 1965 to 1966. Then came Cowboy in Africa, in 1967 to 1968, where he played a rodeo champion hired to help manage wildlife on a Kenyan ranch. While neither show achieved the success of The Rifleman, both demonstrated Chuck's continued appeal and versatility. He also appeared in numerous films throughout this period, taking on a wide range of roles. He played in action movies, dramas, westerns, even comedies. He wasn't a leading man in most of these films, but he was always solid, always reliable, always professional. Directors knew that when they hired Chuck Connors, they were getting someone who would show up prepared and deliver what was needed. He worked steadily right up until his health began to fail in the early 1990s. And speaking of his later years, let's talk about something that shocked even his closest friends. Chuck's surprising friendship with Soviet Premier Leonid Brezhnev. Yes, you read that correctly. Chuck Connors, the conservative Republican, became unlikely friends with the leader of the Soviet Union during the height of the Cold War. This bizarre relationship began in 1973 when Brezhnev visited the United States for diplomatic talks with President Richard Nixon. During his visit, Brezhnev made a special request. He wanted to meet Chuck Connors. Turns out, The Rifleman had been broadcast in the Soviet Union, and Brezhnev was a huge fan. He loved the show, watched it religiously, and idolized Chuck Connors as Lucas McCain. When Brezhnev arrived in California for meetings with Nixon at the Western White House in San Clemente, Chuck was invited to meet the Soviet leader. And what happened next became one of the strangest moments in Cold War history. According to witnesses, when Brezhnev saw Chuck Connors walking toward him, the normally stoic Soviet leader literally ran across the tarmac and gave Chuck an enormous bear hug. He was starstruck, completely giddy, acting like a teenage fan meeting his hero. Through a translator, Brezhnev gushed about The Rifleman, told Chuck how much he loved the show, and invited him to visit the Soviet Union. Chuck, never one to turn down an adventure, accepted. And so began one of the most unlikely friendships in political and entertainment history. Chuck visited the Soviet Union, where he was treated like royalty. Brezhnev gave him gifts, including a pair of engraved pistols, and Chuck reciprocated with gifts of his own. When Brezhnev died in 1982, Chuck actually requested to attend the funeral, though it's unclear if he ultimately did. The friendship between these two men, one a symbol of American individualism and cowboy justice, the other the leader of communist totalitarianism, seemed impossible, yet it was real. And it showed yet another layer of Chuck Connors' complex personality. Throughout all of this, the successful career, the multiple marriages and divorces, the friendships with presidents and premiers, the hatred of Gregory Peck, Chuck Connors maintained a carefully crafted public image. He was Lucas McCain, the honorable father and protector. He was the all-American hero, the former athlete, the man's man. But those closest to him knew the truth. Chuck was struggling with demons that he rarely discussed publicly. He was a heavy smoker for most of his adult life, going through multiple packs a day. He drank, though accounts vary on whether it was problematic or just social. He dealt with the pain of failed relationships, the pressure of living up to an iconic role, and the knowledge that no matter what else he accomplished, he would always be the Rifleman first and Chuck Connors second. As the 1980s progressed and Chuck entered his 60s, he began to slow down. The roles became less frequent. He did more television guest appearances and smaller parts in films. He spent more time at his ranch in Tehachapi, away from the Hollywood spotlight. He was still recognizable wherever he went, 6'5" former athletes who starred in iconic TV shows don't exactly blend into crowds, but he enjoyed his relative privacy. He would sign autographs, talk to fans, share stories about the Rifleman, and generally seemed at peace with his legacy. But in 1992, everything changed. Chuck entered the hospital in Los Angeles suffering from lingering pneumonia. It seemed like a routine treatment, antibiotics, rest, and he'd be back on his feet. But the pneumonia wasn't routine. When doctors ran additional tests, they discovered something terrifying. Chuck had lung cancer, and it was advanced. The decades of heavy smoking had finally caught up with him. The diagnosis came as a shock to everyone, including Chuck himself. He had always been so physically robust, so seemingly indestructible, that the idea of cancer seemed impossible. But cancer doesn't care about how tough you are. It doesn't care about your reputation or your legacy, or how many backboards you shattered, or how many television episodes you starred in. The cancer was aggressive, and Chuck's body, weakened by the pneumonia, couldn't fight it effectively. His condition deteriorated rapidly. Family members were called. Close friends came to visit. And Chuck Connors, the towering figure who had dominated basketball courts, baseball diamonds, movie screens, and television sets for 5 decades, found himself facing his final opponent. In those last days at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, Chuck had time to reflect on his life. He thought about his parents, his childhood in Brooklyn, his sports career, his time in Hollywood. He thought about his children and his failed marriages, wondering if he could have been a better father, a better husband. He thought about the friends he'd made, Duke Wayne, Sammy Davis, Johnny Crawford, and the enemies he'd created. And yes, he thought about Gregory Peck. Even at the end, that anger, that resentment, that feeling of having been wronged on the set of The Big Country 35 years earlier, still burned inside him. Some grudges you carry to the grave, and Chuck Connors' hatred of Gregory Peck was one of them. On November 10, 1992, at the age of 71, Chuck Connors drew his last breath. The official cause of death was pneumonia stemming from lung cancer. The news spread quickly through Hollywood and beyond. Obituaries appeared in newspapers across the country and around the world. The Rifleman's star dies at 71. Chuck Connors, TV's Lucas McCain, succumbs to cancer. The tributes poured in from colleagues, friends, and fans. Johnny Crawford, devastated by the loss of his mentor and father figure, gave emotional interviews about how Chuck had shaped his life and career. John Wayne had died years earlier, so he couldn't comment, but many of their mutual friends shared stories about the respect and loyalty these two men had shared. Interestingly, Gregory Peck, when asked about Chuck's death by reporters, gave a brief, polite statement expressing condolences and acknowledging Connors' contributions to entertainment. It was professional, courteous, and completely devoid of any personal warmth. Even in death, these two men could not bridge the gap that had formed between them on that film set in 1957. Peck would live another 11 years, passing away in 2003 at the age of 87, his reputation intact as one of Hollywood's greatest gentlemen. Whether he ever knew the full depth of Chuck Connors' hatred for him is unknown. Chuck was buried at San Fernando Mission Cemetery in Mission Hills, California. His grave marker is simple and dignified, befitting a man who, despite his larger-than-life personality, never wanted excessive fanfare. Fans still visit the grave, leaving flowers, small toys, rifles in tribute to the Rifleman, baseball memorabilia acknowledging his sports career. His legacy lives on through reruns of his television shows, particularly The Rifleman, which continues to air on various classic TV networks. New generations discover the show and fall in love with Lucas McCain all over again. Johnny Crawford, until his own death in 2021 from Alzheimer's disease at age 75, remained a devoted keeper of Chuck's memory, always quick to share stories and defend his friend's reputation. But what are we to make of Chuck Connors' intense hatred of Gregory Peck? Was it justified? Was Peck really the arrogant, controlling egomaniac that Chuck believed him to be? Or was Chuck simply unable to deal with Peck's authority as producer and star of The Big Country? The truth, as with most things, probably lies somewhere in between. Film sets are pressure cookers, especially on big-budget productions with multiple strong personalities involved. William Wyler was a demanding, perfectionist director. Gregory Peck was protecting his investment and his vision for the film. Charlton Heston was fighting for his character's relevance. And Chuck Connors was trying to make his mark in a major Hollywood production. These circumstances were ripe for conflict. What happened on The Big Country could happen on any film set. But what turned a professional disagreement into a lifelong grudge was the personalities involved. Chuck Connors was not a man who easily forgave or forgot perceived slights. He carried wounds, nursed grievances, and held on to anger. This was both a strength and a weakness. It gave him the fierce determination that drove him to succeed as an athlete and actor. But it also prevented him from letting go of conflicts that might have been resolved with time, perspective, and maturity. In the end, Chuck Connors was exactly what he appeared to be, an authentic, unfiltered, sometimes contradictory, always fascinating human being. He was capable of great warmth and mentorship, as Johnny Crawford experienced firsthand. He was capable of loyalty and friendship, as his relationships with John Wayne and Sammy Davis Jr. demonstrated. He was capable of transcending political and cultural boundaries, as his bizarre friendship with Leonid Brezhnev proved. But he was also capable of harboring intense, lasting hatred, as Gregory Peck discovered. This complexity is what makes Chuck Connors such a compelling figure even decades after his death. He wasn't just the Rifleman, that idealized father figure who always did the right thing. He was a real person with flaws, prejudices, grudges, and contradictions. He could be petty and stubborn. He could hold on to anger that served no productive purpose. But he could also be generous, kind, and genuinely caring toward those he considered part of his circle. Understanding Chuck Connors requires accepting all of these aspects, not just the heroic image he projected on television. The story of Chuck Connors and Gregory Peck is ultimately a cautionary tale about the dangers of letting professional conflicts become personal vendettas. Whatever happened on the set of The Big Country, it wasn't worth carrying that hatred for 35 years. It didn't hurt Gregory Peck. He went on to have an incredible career and is remembered as one of cinema's greatest actors. But it did something to Chuck. It created a bitter spot in his otherwise colorful life, a reminder that some wounds, whether real or perceived, never fully heal. Would Chuck Connors' life have been different if he had let go of his hatred for Gregory Peck? Would he have been happier, more at peace, less burdened by old resentments? We'll never know. What we do know is that Chuck Connors lived life on his own terms, made his own choices, and never apologized for being exactly who he was. He broke backboards and barriers. He played 2 professional sports at the highest level. He became a television icon. He befriended a Soviet premier during the Cold War. And yes, he truly hated Gregory Peck more than anyone, carrying that animosity from the set of The Big Country, all the way to his grave at San Fernando Mission Cemetery. The Rifleman may have always done the right thing, but Chuck Connors was just a man, flawed, complex, sometimes petty, sometimes noble, always authentic. And maybe that's the most important lesson his life teaches us. We're all a mixture of good and bad, light and shadow, love and hate. Chuck Connors never pretended to be perfect. He was simply stubbornly, undeniably himself. And decades after his death, that authenticity continues to fascinate us, making him not just a television legend, but a genuinely interesting human being whose story is worth telling, complete with all its surprising, shocking, and sometimes uncomfortable truths.